This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 527, part 2, entitled Agenda Items for Politicians in the Masculist Half of Parliamentary GECs, that's GECs, Gender Equality Committees. Continuing straight on. Bullet. Legislate the para, that's paternity rejection right. The most blatant form of sexual discrimination that exists is that women have the mara, that's maternity rejection right, and men don't have the para. So women have the legislated right to reject an unwanted pregnancy that could ruin her life, but men don't have the same right. So millions of women lie to their boyfriends / husbands / partners, telling them they are on the pill, but aren't, who really want to get pregnant, do, then force the father to pay for decades for a kid he never wanted in the first place. This is such a massive gender crime against men that masculists feel real hatred towards women who do this to men. Legislating the para will probably prove to be as difficult a task as was achieving the right to vote for the suffragettes. It's likely that women's true gynocentric, solipsistic nature will strongly surface when men push very hard for the para. Legislating the para will force women to grow up, to fit up, so that if they do go ahead with a pregnancy that is not wanted by the father, then by law, she will then take full financial responsibility for the costs of the kid. If a woman is a FIP, then she can more easily afford to pay for the kid on her own. Hence one of the many reasons why masculists place such an emphasis on the FIPPing of women, on the creation of a FIP society. Bullet. Reform the divorce courts. In today's world, one father in 4 is financially crucified and has his life ruined by the hated fluffy feminist divorce court lawyers and judges who strip his kids from him with a 90% probability, force him to give his house to his ex-wife so she can raise her kids in it, force him to pay for his kids whom he will barely be allowed to see. He will lose half his wealth and stuff to her, and if she's a real fluffy, he may be forced to pay her alimony for the rest of his life. This massive injustice that happens to one father in 4 is a real war issue to masculists, who will literally go to war, killing millions of fluffy feminists and thousands of divorce court lawyers and judges if this moral abomination is not soon stopped. The hatred level generated in men, especially masculisted men, in the divorce courts is now so great that there's growing talk in the manosphere of a sex war. The divorce courts need to be thoroughly reformed. Alimony needs to be thrown out, since divorce should be based on the principle of financial independence of both parties, which is yet another reason why masculists put such emphasis on the creation of a FIP society. FIP divorcing mothers can afford not to have alimony and can afford to have their own house. Custody of children will be given jointly by default, so as to avoid 2/3 of young men now utterly rejecting marriage and paternity, since they reject facing a 1 in 4 chance of being financially massacred in a hated, fluffy, feminist-controlled divorce court system. Thus the fluffy feminists, who still have fluffy expectations towards men, in brackets, that is, seeing them as cash machines, to be robbed and abused in favour of fluffy divorcing wives and mothers, close brackets, are hated by masculists and MGTOWs. We see them as hypocrites and indirect genociders. They are hypocrites in the sense that they want equal rights with men in the parliaments, but reject equal obligations with men by rejecting the moral obligation to earn half the living by bothering to fib up and earn decent money. They are genociders because they are indirectly wiping out whole populations, since they have caused 2/3 of young men, and growing, to reject marriage and paternity due to the toxicity of divorce created by these hated fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts. The Masculist half of the GECs need to reform the divorce courts so that whole populations don't get wiped out, and so that millions of men do not have their lives ruined by the utter callousness of the hated fluffy feminist divorce court lawyers and judges. Bullet. Boy fair, the primary and secondary schools. Young boys live in a genocentric world. If their mother does not work when they are very young, they will live in a female-dominated world. If nearly all their kindergarten and primary school teachers are female, then a boy's years of nearly exclusive female teacher dominance will be extended by more years. Even in secondary schools now, even in math and the sciences, there's an ever-growing percentage of teachers who are female, resulting in young boys not being given male role models, so really suffer as a result, feeling alienated by the domination of the female mind, which is not his mind, since his brain wired up in the male pattern due to the testosterone that triggered his brain to configure itself according to the male pattern written into his DNA in his Y chromosome. As adults, most men despise being controlled by a female, as it reminds them of their suffering at the hands of female giants when they were small boys, and they never want to have to relive that experience again, so resist strongly being dominated by females. So the Masculist members of the GECs need to pass new laws that give male kindergarten and primary school teachers higher salaries than their female equivalents, that is, positive discrimination, so as to encourage more men to become kindergarten and primary school teachers, thus providing male role models to young boys who desperately need them. Bullet.